Welcome to Euclid Book 8. This is Euclid Book 8, proposition number 1. Now, do you remember in Euclid Book 7 when I gave you a whole slew of numbers so that you could kind of see how things were going? Well, when Euclid taught his math, he did not use numbers, okay? He used magnitudes, and I would like to go back to that tradition. I feel at this point that you have had enough numbers to truly understand and comprehend what he was trying to do. So in this particular case, we're going to go ahead without numbers and go ahead and illustrate this. Alright, so this is Euclid Book 8, proposition number 1. Here is the diagram. Okay. Now then, this proof says, if there be as many numbers as we please in continued proportion, which I covered in a previous video, and the extremes of them be prime to one another, the numbers are the least of those which have the same ratio with them. Okay? Let there be as many numbers as we please, A, B, C, and D. You can see here we got A, B, C, and D. In continued proportion, which I said I covered in a previous video. And let the extremes of them, A and D, okay, so now you have the means and the extremes. Well, in this case, A and D are the extremes, B and C are the means. A and D are the extremes, B and C are the means. Okay, let's go on here. And let the extremes of them, A and D, which we've already talked about, be prime to one another. Do you remember in some previous videos where I talked about numbers being prime to one another even though the numbers themselves were not prime? Okay. I say that A, B, C, and D are the least of those which have the same ratio with them. For if not, let E, F, G, and H be less than A, B, C, and D, and in the same ratio with them. Okay? So, what we would say here is that as E is to F, so is G is to H. Okay? But these ratios would be in the same ratio as A to B and B, well, be A to B and C to D, okay? But they would actually be numbers smaller than A, B, C, and D. Alright. For if not, let E, F, G, and H be less than A, B, C, and D, and in the same ratio with them. Now, since A, B, C, and D are in the same ratio as E, F, G, and H, and the multitude of numbers A, B, C, and D is equal to the multitudes of numbers E, F, G, and H. Therefore, xi quali, as A is to D, as the extremes are to each other, okay, so is E to H, okay? And this is by Euclid Book 7, proposition number 14. But A and D are prime to each other. Primes are also least, and this is by Euclid Book 7:21, and the least numbers measure those which have the same ratio, the same number of times, the greater, and the less the less, that is, the antecedent, and the consequent to the consequent, which of course is Euclid Book 7, proposition number 20. Therefore, A measures E, so we're now saying that A is somehow going to measure E, even though E is less than A. That's impossible. Therefore, E, F, G, and H, which are less than A, B, C, and D, are not in the same ratio with them. Because if they were, then A would measure E, and that's impossible. Therefore, A, B, C, and D are the least of those which have the same ratio with them. And that's the proof. Alright. I will tell you more in a future video. Stay tuned.